When Star Trek Discovery was announced, there was a lot of celebrating in the Trek fandom. When it was announced that the show would release only on CBS' crummy standalone streaming service, there was a bit more grumbling. When the first trailer came out of San Diego Comic-Con, there were a lot of disappointed people looking around at each other. The trailer was full of explosions and screaming and people looking sad or running, just like any generic science fiction to come out recently. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of that, but Star Trek has a long and storied history of being more. The first Star Trek came out in 1966 and tried to be something that has always been a little bit on the rare side, a science fiction story that imagined a utopian future. Gene Roddenberry, the show's creator, strongly believed that there was good in humanity and wanted to tell a story about where they had overcome their prejudices to help found a federation of planets that sought to raise up the denizens of the galaxy rather than to harm. But he didn't just imagine that future. He actively used his show to help guide people to it through the time-honored science fiction trope of resetting modern issues into a more neutral context to help people see things in a different light and to gain a new understanding. The most famous example from the original series, as the 60s Trek came to be known after it spun off multiple other sequel and prequel series, is probably the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. The episode depicts a society where all of the people had black skin on one vertical half and white skin on the other vertical half, but half of them had the colors reversed from the others. The society destroyed itself because one side viewed itself as inherently superior to the other and attempted to control them. The show is also famous for being the first television show to depict an interracial kiss. These were important, pointed messages in the middle of the civil rights era. The show even went beyond these single moments into the realm of trying to depict possible new normals. It made a black woman an integral part of the bridge crew while the helmsman was Japanese, just a relatively short time after the internment camps of World War II. When the second season started, they added a Russian to the bridge crew in the middle of the Cold War. The crew of the ship frequently spent their time and efforts and attempts to resolve conflicts through puzzle solving and diplomacy and outthinking, rather than by just shooting everything they saw. Villain deaths were often treated as tragedies almost as much as the deaths of the heroes. Not every moment in Star Trek was or should be devoted to social justice or moralizing, and Star Trek had some exciting space battles to break things up every once in a while. Still, its focus never wavered. The sequel series all continued that legacy to later or greater degrees. Even the movies dabbled in it a bit, with one movie that featured an enemy that needed to be understood instead of destroyed, V'ger from the motion picture, another where the preservation of an animal species on our home planet proved to be the key to humanity's survival, Humpbacked Whales, The Voyage Home, and one where the Federation attempted to make peace with its oldest and greatest enemy, despite the fact that hatred lingered heavily in the minds of many, including the hero, Captain Kirk, the undiscovered country. I could probably go on and on about the themes and ideas of Star Trek, but I won't today. But it's important to understand an overview of what the media franchise has largely been about in its more than 50 years of existence. It's been more than a decade since we had a Star Trek series to watch, and a new one was always going to be judged at least partially in the context of what came before. Hardcore Trek fans were further disappointed when this series opened with yet another reimagining of perhaps the most iconic alien species in Star Trek, the Klingons. Seriously, the first time this happened, it was fine. They suddenly had a special effects budget, but once was enough. The galaxy is pretty big. There can always be more aliens. Anyway, after we were introduced to new Klingons, we got into a war with those same Klingons, and the first 3 episodes ended up just being a lot of battles and fighting and arguing. The female captain of color was replaced with a white dude, though Jason Isaacs is awesome, and he seemed prepared to be a stereotypical science fiction action hero, hell-bent on killing everything that blinks at him the wrong way. But then something happened. The show stepped back. The warmongering began to be tempered with a desire for science and understanding. The kind of thing that has always pervaded Star Trek. Sure, the captain wants to kill everything and may very well be suffering some sort of mental illness, perhaps even psychopathy. But every other crew member on the ship seems far more interested in discovering new science and new species. The diplomacy is still a little lacking, but you can't have everything immediately. As the series has continued, it has become clear that the creators also still care about representation. A homosexual relationship between two of the senior crew members was revealed, and they added a character played by a man who was part Pakistani. In the final episode of the season, they touched on PTSD and survivor's guilt, two things that have been running rampant through our society for decades, and have only recently begun to become addressed in a helpful way. Despite the constant forced and incorrect references to TOS, no, that is not a D7 cruiser. The show had an excellent callback to prior series with its episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which featured both a time loop, something that is not unique to Star Trek but has still been done several times, and old Star Trek recurring guest character Harcourt Fenton Mudd. The crew eventually resolves the issue in a very Star Trek kind of way when they manage to trick Mudd into breaking the loop and signaling his fiancée Stella instead of his Klingon buyers. The situation is resolved in an embarrassing way for the villain instead of a deadly way. A highlight of quick thinking and a refusal to kill were unnecessary that has long highlighted the franchise. So maybe the show creators didn't get it originally. There's some scuttlebutt that the original lead creator, Brian Fuller, had his hands primarily in the first 3 episodes, i.e. the most objectionable ones, before he left. But they really seem to be finding a Star Trek kind of groove now. That's not to say that the show should never try anything new. Deep Space Nine only got better once it switched to a more serialized format after the previous 2 series had been largely episodic. Discovery is better for Jason Isaacs' character, even if he never could have existed while Gene Roddenberry was alive. You can't live on nostalgia forever, after all, but it's still important to also remember where you started. In this case, the promise of a utopian future as imagined by Roddenberry. It turns out, too, that this is striking a chord with that coveted younger audience. The show has been so well received since its debut that a 2nd season has already been ordered, despite the viewership likely being hamstrung to at least a moderate degree by CBS' insistence on keeping it exclusive to their streaming platform. In the mid-season finale, the crew of the USS Discovery moves even further away from the war. This might be a deviation for only a couple of episodes, or it might be for the rest of the season. It's also caused seemingly intentionally by our dangerously unstable captain, but it might just lead to the first opportunity the show has had to really spend some time fulfilling that original concept from the opening credits of the first Star Trek to ever grace a television set, to boldly go where no man has gone before. And if the artists behind this show remember that much, hopefully they'll remember the rest. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.